Mr. Craig Douglas, how are you, sir?
Good. How are you, Julian?
Amazing, amazing,
Awesome.
awesome, Alex. It's a great pleasure to have you on this show. I was looking forward to that.
Thanks, man. Thanks for introducing me to your audience.
Awesome, awesome. Do you want to give us a little introduction about yourself, who you are, what you've been doing, and then we'll get into it.
Sure. I am. My name is Craig Douglas. I'm a retired sheriff's deputy from South Mississippi. I did a total of 21 years in my career. Most of that was spent as a narcotics agent, a SWAT cop, or both simultaneously. I retired in 2011 to do training full time. So this is my 12th year of doing training full time. It's my 21st year of doing training under the brand Shivworks globally. I now teach in 48 states in the US, 11 countries outside of the US, 5 or 6 federal law enforcement agencies, all 4 branches of the US military, and I hold a standing contract within a small section of the U.S. intelligence community as their combatives instructor. I've held that for the past 8 years now. I'm best known in training circles for weapons-based grappling, the entangled problem, if you will, offensively and defensively with guns and knives, and um, translating that into novel, unusual space like cars.
Yeah. Oh well, that's really yeah, that's a good one. Well, you definitely been an inspiration to me and to many others, and you
Thanks.
definitely the person that influenced me and inspired me to start training into cars more. So that was definitely yeah, watching the videos and plus you always got that great weather over there where you are, which is brilliant. We
Not
don't,
always. Actually, I'm in Austin, Texas right now, and the weather's fairly British. It's
is it
yeah, it's overcast, gray. There's a drizzly
okay?
rain, so yeah, it's not a great day today.
That's what we have here all the time. I mean, we get used to it, but to be honest with you, I'm starting to think to myself now, like it's time to think about the future and maybe go to some warmer place at some point because
Right?
it gets on your psyche that weather, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it absolutely does. It absolutely does. Weather is a big factor, I think, in wellness
Uh,
and emotional health.
yeah, for sure, for sure. We can speak a bit about that in a bit.
Sure.
So, which city were you born, Craig?
I was born on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, so if you look at a map of the United States and
Okay.
you look at the Gulf of Mexico, which is a crescent that goes from Texas all the way around to Florida, I was born in a place called Biloxi, Mississippi, which is literally on the water. You can't get any further south in the United States without actually being in the water. So, small town that was always probably between heavy industry, tourism. We have a big, like the PGA has golf tournaments, like
Yeah.
annually in the Mississippi Gulf Coast. We got gaming legalized in 1993, which kind of changed the face of the area forever. And now the Mississippi Gulf Coast is like the number 3 area in the United States for gaming. So you have Las Vegas, you have Jersey, New Jersey, and then you
Yeah.
have us. So we have much better weather. We have a beach, and yeah, it was a great place to grow up. Fairly traditional small town values,
Yeah.
but at the same time, because it's a coastline, it's still a little bit more of a melting pot, cosmopolitan population. We have
Yeah.
a huge Serbo-Croatian community. We have a huge Vietnamese community.
Okay.
And most of the Vietnamese community came to work the shrimp boats.
Ah,
That because we have a huge seafood industry in the
yeah.
Mississippi Sound, so probably culturally, racially, a little bit more diverse than, well, quite a bit more diverse than the
Okay.
rest of the state. When people think of old antebellum South cotton and things like that. I've had several Brits actually come and stay with me. One of my best friends, one of my mates. As a matter of fact, he was the best man at my second wedding. He's a team leader with SO19 with the London Metropolitan Police, which is the Met's version of the FBI's hostage rescue team, more or less. But he's come over several times. Another couple who I'm really good friends with in London have come over several times. My host, Ian, has come over several times. And Brett's, every time they come over, they're astounded, like, by this hidden jewel of good weather, beaches, and manners.
Yeah.
So it's a lovely place. It's a great place to grow up. And it's still very near to my heart. I have a house there still. I've relocated to Austin, but I still have a house in Mississippi that I will never sell. So
any criminality over there? Did you have to deal with a bit of that when you were growing up, or?
I actually was I became kind of a juvenile delinquent and a criminal growing up. So
What was that?
you know, yeah, I mean, you can always find a bad neighborhood, regardless how big or small. And as a kid, a troubled youth growing up, yeah, I definitely found that and got to a point where I had 3 felonies on me when I was 14 years old. And I was not less. I was sent to a private military school to kind of straighten me out, and then that led to a 3-year enlistment in the Army, and that finally put me back on the straight and narrow and kept me out of prison.
Okay. Strange. It's strange to see how a lot of us, like instructors, have been like problem kids when we were younger, and I was the same. I mean, I've been involved with a bit of that when I was younger, and then something happened. There was this shift that just went, just put me back on the right path.
Right.
But when you look back and you realize where you could have ended if you carried on, and where you are now, it's just day and night, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But for the grace of God, I got on the straight and narrow and got straightened out fairly early.
Okay. So I know that you spent a major part of your life working in the police forces. How did that work for you?
So I was in the Army. I served in the Ranger Regiment from 1986 to 1989. Got out, came home, had my college money, started working in law enforcement. When I first got out, I actually was a bouncer at a bar.
Mm,
So I did that for about 6 months. My family was a law enforcement family. My grandfather was kind of a local legend in law enforcement. So I kind of find he was the patriarchal figure in my life. So I kind of followed his footsteps, hired on with the Sheriff's Department in 1990. While I was going to college, so I was a full-time law enforcement officer. I was a full-time college student, so I didn't have much time. I worked, I went to school, and I trained in martial arts. So yeah, I did that for 21 years. The
mm,
intention was not to make a career out of law enforcement. The intention was to get my degree, and then probably serve in the U.S. intelligence community. But what happened was I kind of entered training in law enforcement early because of my martial arts background, and we didn't have a lot of training at the time. That invariably led to me having a lot of collateral duties
yeah.
as an instructor in our police academy. So I started teaching defensive tactics, as we call it in the U.S.,
Yeah.
in the police academy in 1992. Um, striking, kicking, subject control,
Yeah.
baton work, weapons retention, all the all the skills associated with law enforcement. I did that from 1992 to actually a year after I retired, 2012. So I taught police officers formally inside an academy environment for 20 years. In
Okay.
addition, and that was a collateral duty in addition to starting off as a correctional officer, then a uniform patrol officer, then an undercover narcotics agent, and then a plainclothes topside, if you will, the opposite of undercover narcotics agent. And I did that along with SWAT until I promoted into an administrative position as a captain, as our agency's training officer, our first one, as a matter of fact. And I did that for the last 3 years of my career and retired out. So yeah, had a good, over 20 years law enforcement career, and
Yeah.
this started taking off, and I decided to give this a go.
Okay. So did you actually started martial arts at a young age? What did you start with, and when did you actually gravitated from the martial arts to the combatives? Was that because of your work, basically?
Well, yeah. So I was Daniel Larusso. I was the skinny kid with the birthmark who was beat up and bullied in
Mm.
school, and my grandfather actually, against my mother's wishes, decided that I was going to learn how to fight and take care of myself. So I started doing Taekwondo in 1973. I was 5 years old, and I did that um, hard and heavy probably for 4 years in a kids class, kind of like martial arts daycare. Um, so I would finish school and I would go to this kids martial arts class at 3:30, and I would train from like 3:30 to 5. And then after 4 years of that, I started. I had an affinity for it. I was good at it.
Mm.
I started training I started training in the adults class, and I actually started teaching children when I was a child, when I was 9 years old. So they started having me, under supervision, of course, teach the kids class, and then I would eat dinner with my Taekwondo instructors who had a small studio apartment that they lived in attached to the gym. I would eat dinner with them, and I'd train with the adults, and my grandfather would come pick me up 8:30. I'd do a little homework, and then I'd go home. And I did that until I was probably another 5 years, until I was 14
Mhm.
years old. Got black belt ranked in Taekwondo, which for the era, that's really all we had locally. Fought in point karate tournaments. Had a pretty horrific, violent black belt test where I got my nose broken for the first
Mm.
time, smashed flat against my face. And even back then, when we started on 1973, that predated um, the safety equipment that we now see in a lot of point fighting karate tournaments. So we literally fought pretty much bare knuckle with control.
Yeah.
I think it was maybe a year and a half after I started, the old Joan Ree safety chop and safety kicks, the
Mm.
pads for your hands and your feet came out. So yeah, I did that until I was 14, and then got interested in Aikijitsu and Aikido. Did that until I was sent off to military school. Didn't really do anything in military school except um, they had boxing there
Mm.
in military school, and I started boxing a little bit, um, and then did a little bit of judo in that time period. Went in the army, and then one of the guys who trained some Aikido and Aikijitsu back when I was an early teenager and moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and he started um, training with Francis Fong in Southeast Asian systems, most notably Inasanto, Lacoste, Kali, the Mafalindo Salat, the various Salat systems of the Detwars, the Muay Thai is taught by uh, Ajahn Chai, and all of those systems. But he brought that back, and because I was stationed at Fort Benning, so I was in Columbus, Georgia, so I was relatively close to Atlanta. I could go when we were in the field or deployed somewhere. I would go train and stay with David. So I started doing those systems, and they were at the time cutting edge. Probably about '87, I started doing that stuff. Uh, got out of the Army, continued going up to Atlanta. I'd drive up there and I'd do the old the Southeastern Martial Arts conferences, which were on Friday night. You had Francis that taught Wing Chun. Saturday and Sunday, Gradam would do a half a day, and the Master Child would do a half a day. I did those like quarterly, and then you know did that until '93, where I met Doug Markita.
Oh yeah.
I met Doug at a Kali seminar, actually, locally, and Doug at the time was stationed at Keesler Air Force Base as an airman, um, and he was doing Pakitatourism. So Doug and I hit it off, and he had a small garage group of mostly Filipino airmen, and he was exploring Pakitatourism at the time. He recently got into it, and I liked Doug, and we got along well. So Doug and I trained together like hard and heavy from 93 probably to the middle of '96 when I really started getting deep into undercover work. And then Doug got out of the Air Force and went home to upstate New York, Rochester, I believe.
Okay.
Right. I wasn't really training actively in martial arts while I was doing undercover work, but I was still teaching defensive tactics as a collateral duty in the police academy. I'd come out from wherever I was at, come in and teach for a week, with long hair and earrings and shit like that, because I was fairly deep under. And prior to that, I've gotten into first Shuto, as done by Yori Nakamura and Eric Paulson. In fact, I've got some pictures of me with Eric back when he still had his ponytail, before he got pounded in that extreme fighting event where the guy latched onto his hair. And then I also got introduced to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, 93 or 94, 1 year, Jean-Jacques, was it Jean-Jacques or Hagen? Can't remember. One of Machado's came and subbed for Master Child when one of those martial arts conferences in Atlanta. And I was always good at grappling. Yeah, I had an affinity for it. And I kind of dabbled in BJJ, but really didn't get active in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu consistently, probably until, I don't know, maybe when I came out of UC work, probably late 98, 99, 2000, and started really getting more active. We still didn't have a lot of it locally, so I had to go find it, and I wasn't training consistently. I probably finally a couple places opened up. We had a local guy, Alan Belcher, that was a top 10 UFC fighter. He ended up he ended up opening a gym locally. It was more of a fight club gym, but I would go there and train here and there, and got on a fairly consistent road with BJJ in the 2000s. And then as Shivworks started picking up, my personal training became less frequent because I was on the road more and more teaching others. But I was still assimilating Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu regularly. So I mean, I've been to sum all this up. I've been in martial arts of some type since I was 5 years old. I am 55 now, so that's 50 years, I guess, of a bunch of different, probably mostly silly martial arts, to be quite frank. But it's a chicken or the egg thing. Yeah. And to answer your other question about gravitating towards combatives, I think probably the first thing we need to do is define martial arts and define combatives.
Yes.
Those words are bandied about quite a bit, and what's the definition of one and what's the definition of the other? I don't really know that I have one, other than I can give you some defining characteristics of what, for me, makes something combatives. And a lot of this was informed by my experiences as a police officer, and moreover, teaching police officers and armed or professional populations. Generally, combatives, when we look at the rank and file, probably one of the defining correct characteristics to me of combatives, especially if we look at the historical um, elements of combatives, they tend to be closed systems,
Mm.
and they tend to be taught in compressed, finite time periods to quite often a largely disinterested or ambivalent population.
Mm.
So when we think of rank and file soldiers, who were volunteers in the world wars, when we think of draftees in Vietnam, a lot of those people probably weren't into martial arts. They weren't into boxing. They weren't into, wrestling. They weren't into combat sports. So they had to be given something um, that was efficient, retainable, and contextually appropriate to what they were doing. So I think that to me is really kind of what defines combatives, even though now we see more and more people who are enthusiasts who train in combatives. And where's the line between that becoming a martial art, where it exists to perpetuate itself.
Mm.
We're interested in the topic matter. We're enthusiastic about it, and we have all the time in the world to engage in our hobby. So, and I have done both, and I've done extensive training for both the enthusiast population and for the professional, ambivalent, disinterested population. So, and still do. Like, for example, right now, professionally doing this, I'd say my time is about 50-50 between both populations, both communities. So probably 50% of my coursework is for open enrollment enthusiasts, and 50% of my coursework is for closed populations like the military or
Yeah.
elements of law enforcement or the intelligence community, or even some real offbeat clients I have, like NGOs. I do some work for some NGOs and nonprofits that do humanitarian work in Africa, and a lot of these people have like Peace Corps backgrounds,
Yeah.
so they're truly deeply morally pacifists,
Yeah.
and believe in non-proliferation and things like that. So that population, trying to give them something, that will work for, common
Yeah.
abductions that occur in the lesser developed countries that they go to. Yeah, that's a whole different ballgame as far as training people like that and giving them something viable for them, and even getting them engaged,
Yeah.
is very, very different than a BJJ kid in the United States who trains daily,
Yeah.
gets a CCW, sees a video of mine on the internet. It's like, wow, that's the gun training that looks like what I do. I'm going to go do that. And he nerds out on that with an airsoft gun after he does coursework with me with all his buddies.
Mm.
wildly disparate populations, which
Yeah.
again informs um, a lot of what I do and how my pedagogy, how I develop curriculum. What are the common elements that work for everybody?
Yeah. Because it really changes the dynamic of how you teach, depending on who you teach. And so, as you say, someone that's got experience in the martial arts, that trains day in, day out, that's got the mindset as well, that loves that stuff, you'll be able to go much more in depth than the housewife that just wants to learn how to stay alive, basically, and who's never done anything in her life.
Yeah, absolutely. What are the common core things that everybody needs that um, when you're teaching in a compressed time format,
Yeah.
and also understanding the difference between perfect and good enough.
Mm.
That's a big one. That's a quote I heard a while back by John Danaher. And Danaher was commenting on the idea of how we excessively fetishize detail and movement. And that's awesome when you're a BJJ practitioner and you're in ADCC and you're fighting another BJJ practitioner that knows your playbook. But there's a significant detail in the way you do an underhook that might be a little bit different. What
Yeah.
that level of detail compared to teaching a housewife how to get her arm in a clinch from the outside to the inside, why that's important from the standpoint of holding posture and access to both parties' waistlines, and understanding that she needs good enough, but that high level BJJ guy needs perfect, but
Yeah.
everybody needs an underhook.
It's
You know,
it's all about micro adjustments after when you see it. Like you see professionals or even like professional boxers are still working on the same fundamentals, the same
yeah,
jab, cross, bobbing and weaving and hook, but they're micro adjusting. They're trying to make it that inch better, better, better every time. So yeah.
yeah. I mean, that's arguably there are three punches in box: of a lead straight, a power hand, and an arc of some type, whether it's
Mhm.
horizontal or whether it's vertical.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, and so three punches, arguably that you spend literally a career
yeah.
mastering in combination and tandem,
But
and I tend to these days, and especially as you get older, and it gets harder to learn and get new patterns of movement and motor pathways. We just don't. You need more repetition as you get older.
yeah,
I tend to be with my own training these days, and even with the way I train other people. I tend to try and drive my own training, my own curriculum development, and my own pedagogy with reductionism
yeah.
and congruency.
Hmm.
And we hear sound bites, that kind of fly in the face of this. Like one of my favorites is, well, it's another tool in the toolbox. And my counter to that is at some point you have to stop collecting tools
Yes,
and actually build something.
yes. It's true. What you're saying, is something I have discovered already. Something that made me evolve a lot as an instructor and as a martial artist. It's like before I was the accumulator of technique, and one day I went to train with one guy called Tommy Carruthers in Scotland, who teaches Bruce Lee's martial art.
Mhm.
He's probably one of the best in the world, if not the. And using the analogy of the toolbox, when I arrived to see him, I had a massive toolbox full of tools, all the tools that I've accumulated, from 4 years old, all the different martial arts like yourself. And he basically seen that toolbox and he went, "Give me that." He took that toolbox and flipped it upside down and just emptied it on the floor and went, that you will never use that. That's too complicated. You'll never have enough time to use that. No, it just basically made me stay with 5 or 6 tools, which were very, very different in nature, but they were all doing a universal job. They were all universal tools that I could really use. And he made me work these 5, 6 tools until I owned them. And that's when I realized this is like a bit like the technical mind versus the conceptual mind, where before it was you were thinking in terms of technique because you were accumulating a technique, and for each attack there was a technique, but it was becoming way too codified. And so eventually at some point you start thinking in terms of concepts and principles, and now you make space on the hard drive, and now you're like, I can create my own techniques now because I understand the underlying concept and principle behind it. So it's a big step for anyone to understand that.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, the problem is, we and I think you hear those words bandied about a lot by instructors, concepts and principles.
mm,
Um, I tend to think about strategies, tactics, and techniques,
yeah.
which the military, it kind of has codified that better, because I mean, what is a concept,
Mm,
and what's the difference between a concept and a principle?
yeah.
And when you ask most guys that teach, you're using these words, and I'm very big on what words mean.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what's the difference between a concept and a principle without cracking a dictionary open?
Yeah.
As you use those words in your instruction, what does that mean? I think they're a little bit overused.
Okay.
Like, for example, um, I teach for unentangled, opened up at range knife work.
Yeah.
Okay, your strategy is keep him off you.
Yeah.
That's your strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Your tactic for executing that strategy is headhunting.
Mm-hmm.
So what is headhunting? Headhunting are straight thrusts, whether you're holding something with a point, whether it's a blade or a screwdriver, protruding from the thumb or the pinky side of your hand. However you've drawn that, however you've recovered that off of a barroom floor in a ground fight. Okay. Um, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the point into his face.
Mm-hmm.
That's the tactic, and the technique for
Yeah.
executing that is what we think of as a knife jab, which is a lead hand straight.
Mm-hmm.
So strategies, stay off me. Actually, with a blade, when I teach like my foundational and really only open enrollment knife course, Edged Weapons Overview, your strategy, what you're trying to accomplish with a knife, is very simple. Get off me, stay off me, especially
Yeah.
with small knives. What they do fundamentally is make space that allows you, at least in places like the US where you can carry a handgun, get you to something better and more reliable for inducing a quicker physiological incapacitation, or get you to an escape. We're not trying to knife fight. We're not trying to biomechanically disable. We're not trying to exsanguinate. We're not trying to hit pressure points. We're not even concerned with the mechanism of injury, because all of those things can work and all of those things can fail. And there's not a single body of medical literature anywhere that I'm aware of that indicates that one method for using a blade will produce a physiological incapacitation quicker than another. We have that with small arms, and it's a very well-known field of study called wound ballistics.
Mm-hmm.
We know what this is. We know that if something that I hold with one or two hands, I put 1 to 5 nipple to the edge of the collarbone or in the ocular window. We know from data and real world measured events that will produce a physiological incapacitation quicker than any other way of using something that you hold, a firearm, with one or two hands. We don't have that with knives. So when I teach blade work, I don't concern myself or again, hyper focus on mechanism of injury. I focus on the end state and strategy. When I draw a knife balled up with someone in a clinch or a ground fight, what I'm trying to do is use that knife to get this person off me. And once I do, if they reattach, what I'm trying to do is keep that person off of me. Get off me, stay off me. That's what they do. Okay. And the reality is that the vast majority of stoppages using knives on people are psychological stoppages.
Yeah.
So if that's true, then the conundrum in looking at strategy, tactics, and techniques is how do you predicate your method of use with the adversary's willingness to quit? Can't. Okay. So that's why I don't worry about mechanism of injury, because it can all work and it can all fail,
Yeah.
So that's why I teach what I teach. That's why the strategy is get off me, stay off me. Okay. And stay off me, meaning that either I have, through a combination of wrestling and hitting this guy with this knife in places that are probably better to hit someone than other places, general target areas. I can get that person off of me. And now once the distance is opened, or I saw the problem developing, I armed myself preemptively before it got to a clinch or ground.
Yeah.
Okay. But now, again, the second part of that strategy, which is binary, get off me, stay off me, okay, is keeping that person off of me. Strategy. Tactic for doing so, headhunting. Why? Because it's really hard to close on someone, wrap them up, grab them, limit their mobility when a point is flying in your face. It's really hard to do that. And again, regardless of the mechanism of injury. So, and the technique for doing so is a knife jab, right? Strategy, tactic, strategy, stay off me, tactic, headhunting, technique, knife jab. And I tend to use that more than concepts and principles,
Okay. Yeah.
More or less strategies, tactics, and techniques.
It makes sense. It makes sense. In fact, when you say strategy, it sounds like what I call concept or principle, like getting the person off you. In fact, when you said you just explain it with different words, but that means pretty much the same thing.
And that's what I mean by exactly just being a lot more cogent, right, in presentation, instructorship, and pedagogy. I'm fairly adamant about that, because I will ask guys what's the difference between concept and what's the difference between principle, right? And I will they'll think for a minute and they're like, well, concept is a kind of a big picture, and a principle is
a set of ideas.
How it works. Why is not a principle, big picture, a concept aside? You know what I'm saying? I think the language is a little vague, and when most people use that language, I just think it's imprecise in a lot.
Okay. No, that's good. That's interesting. You want to be as precise as possible in order to get get to people.
Yeah, and here's the thing too. It's not, the words have to be meaningful. The words when you present, it's never about more words. It's about the right words.
Yeah.
Because the bottom line, as far as the neurological basis of motor learning is for adults, it's andragogy and repetition. They learn by doing. So our job as motor skills instructors is to present pedagogy, which you have to do initially with as few words as possible to get them moving and experiencing so they can actually learn. We actually really facilitate their learning process.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's for me, it's not about more words, it's the right words, and all instructorship and all formal presentation should be driven with brevity.
Okay. Okay. So what are the key factors of wrestling with blades and firearms in confined spaces, which I know is your thing?
The key factors are posture control of the adversary's posture, head position, hand fighting, and in terms of accessing weapons, what I call in-fight weapons access.
That's exactly what I had written right after that.
Yeah, and that's kind of clunky language, you know, especially what that means. In-fight weapons access, that's my phrase.
Coined it, yes.
That I coined to describe early on. This is more than 20 years old, and I'm a better instructor than I was then. A more adroit instructor, a more descriptive instructor, and I probably come up with some better language, but it's stuck. It's kind of clunky, but anyway, what in-fight weapons access refers to is what I think of as a timing rule for accessing weapons. And the timing rule is essentially what we must do if we're going to present a weapon within entanglement, standing or grounded, clinch or ground fight, is control the limb of the adversaries closest to our weapon before we actually initiate the presentation. Now, you can cheat that a little bit with knives. With firearms, absolutely cannot. Absolutely not. They're a little bit different. One's a projectile weapon, one's a contact weapon. Once a blade is out, it's doing damage. A firearm has to be indexed a certain way for it to, and it has to be, it can't be grabbed for a cycle, and used the way you have to use it. So those are the factors really in doing that.
Okay. So would you agree that a blade is more dangerous in ECQ, in extreme close quarter, than a gun is? Because
no, I wouldn't agree that it's more dangerous. Because firearms, there's an old adage in the U.S. God made all men, and Samuel Colt made all men equal. Firearms are truly the great equalizer. I mean, literally, by doing that, you can extinguish a human life.
Yeah.
They are always going to be the better physiological incapacitators compared to knives, especially small knives. Small knives in fight tend to be poor physiological incapacitators. Now, where we see someone who has managed to palm a small knife, it's not kinetic yet, so it's not physical yet. They're looking at a part of the body and they initiate and just go back. We see a lot of rapid physiological incapacitations then. Hits, assassinations, sucker punches with knives. We see a lot of people get put down with one-shot stops. We don't see the same thing off of a sucker punch, balled up on the floor. It's very different, as far as what knives can do. The targeting is much less precise. Balled up with someone, it's hard to get to those areas. You know, it's hard to hit a particular artery or vein when you're on the floor, semi-conscious. You know, just trying to find a knife. I see knives get dropped and knocked out of hands better, and I can tell usually who has done resistive pressure-based work
Yeah.
with blades based on the things they say. Like one of the things I'll hear all the time is, well, knives are faster than guns. I don't find that to be true. What I do see is I see way more knives get dropped on the floor than I do handguns. And, you know, I'll step off camera for a bit. And the reality of it is this. If you look at this push dagger right now,
Yeah.
okay, and you compare that to the butt of a Glock 17,
17, yeah.
okay, which is easier to get in hand, which is more sure in hand, especially when you're semi-conscious. Okay, there's no these are not faster than these with a well set up presentation. So that's an example of something, you know, that I think is not based in actual pressure testing. And that's another phrase that I think is thrown around quite a bit. Pressure testing looks a lot different, you know, with different populations.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We'll definitely speak about this as well. So what would you say the best training methodology is in order to teach that sort of approach? You know, grappling with somebody who's got a weapon on himself and kind of, you know, try to basically access yours while you're preventing them from accessing theirs. What would be the training methodology for this?
So in Shivworks, as far as where it's at now,
Hmm.
we teach a base of and strategy for using Greco-Roman wrestling in a weapons-based environment. And we qualify that by telling people that we're not wrestling to wrestle. We're using specific elements of wrestling to facilitate appropriate, contextually relevant end states. Getting a weapon out, keeping a weapon from coming out, staying on your feet, disengaging in a proper tactical way because there is someone else coming in. So we tell people we're not wrestling to wrestle. We're using specific elements of wrestling, you know. And here's the thing: when people say why wrestling, if you look at ancient military culture and people that fielded real armies and did a lot of killing, and you look at how their inside arm's reach weapons-based combat is depicted in their art. If you look at the art of ancient Greece, Rome, or feudal Japan, you see a fairly common trend. You see a combatant grabbing another, maybe by the armor, and trying to put a short weapon into his body. You see a soldier grabbing the weapons-bearing limb of another soldier and trying to keep that out of his body. You see a combatant grabbing another, trying to put him down on the battlefield. So another combatant or soldier can come and put a spear in their face. What you see are expressions and derivations of wrestling. So if wrestling has worked as the base for that range of and kind of combat for 6,000 years plus of humanity,
Probably more, yeah.
all across the planet, I see no reason to deviate from the model. And if you look at, in particular, my coursework, and you look at a lot of Renaissance theories of fighting with weapons to include dueling and personal combat and even military stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
In particular, if you look at Fiore de la Berry, you know, if you look at him, 15th century, I believe, 15th or 14th, I can't remember.
I'll have a look.
You look at him in Italy, with what he was doing with wrestling and daggers, in particular, and then you look at the Codex Wallerstein from Germany, the Fechtbüchs, the fight books as they call them. Every position that I teach, that I've reduced my curriculum down to, you see in line drawings.
Yeah.
And I didn't I didn't reference that work when I was coming up with this, and what I found was working from Orthodox wrestling translating into weapons. It was actually pointed out to me by HEMA guys.
The HEMA, yeah.
The HEMA guys, they were telling me, "Hey, look, man, that looks just like this position from I think the Italian word is abbrazzare, wrestling."
Okay.
From 500 years ago. And sure enough, it's like, fuck, I am reinventing the wheel. So my point is, human beings, to deny the existence, efficacy of grappling, whatever that means to you. And I tend to use the word entangled. Now, range is either entangled, you're close enough to touch them, they're close enough to touch you. People grab each other.
Yeah.
People fall down. People take each other down, or you're unentangled. It's one or the other.
Yeah.
With weapons.
I've always considered like medieval stuff to be some of the most realistic stuff out there, because it's been pressure tested on the battlefield for thousands of years.
And I tell you, if you watch some of these guys who do HEMA, they go after each other. I mean, a lot of those guys also fight MMA. So they beat the shit out of each other. I mean, they do.
And they have fun doing it. Yeah.
They have fun doing it, right? I mean, broken bones are fairly common in HEMA tournaments. So to answer your question, contextualized wrestling and again, reducing it down. So the base oven strategy and that's a formal name within Shivworks for using wrestling in a weapons-based environment, represents 4 hours worth of content. And we teach that module regardless of whether it's an entangled pistol class or it's a knife class. And basically what I've reduced this down to is what I think of as an operating system comprised of the attributes which we develop through drill of pressure, posture, and position. 4 basic attachments: the underhook, the overhook, the bicep tie, and the wrist tie. Attachments meaning grabs, okay, relative arm positions to the adversary. We have an optimal combination of those 4 attachments, which is to play an underhook, arm tie, either bicep or wrist game. Why? Because it stabilizes the clinch. Stabilization meaning we're in posture, we have position, we're controlling his hands, and we're on the inside of his body. He's down on the inside of ours. Though those 4 elements equals stabilizing the clinch. And if you get there and you create that, you are mostly okay. You haven't resolved the clinch, but you've stabilized the clinch. Our primary strategy for resolving the clinch is to get behind him offensively and defensively. It gives us the best options to disengage away from hands that are flying towards our face because he has to turn, or offensively, if I'm going to produce weapons, now he can't defend himself. I teach 2 ways to do that: the duck under and the arm drag. So that's your primary strategy. And then your secondary strategy, if you can't get behind him, is to go for a tie-up. We define a tie-up as binding 2 of his limbs with one of yours, which allows you to free a hand so you can strike without exchanging, or you can produce a weapon if that's legally warranted. And I teach 2 ways to do that: the split seatbelt and the bundle. And which one you take depends on whether you're holding the underhook or he's holding the underhook. So operating system, 4 basic attachments, optimal combination, primary strategy to resolve, 2 ways to execute, secondary strategy if you can't execute the primary, 2 ways to execute. And that represents 4 hours of curriculum before we get into, okay, now we're going to plug a weapon in, whether it's a gun or a knife, or we're going to deal with a weapon, whether it's a gun or a knife. But everything that we do comes back to some expression of that base of and strategy for using wrestling in a weapons-based environment. Again, it's reductionist, it's congruent, it's binary in nature, plan A, plan B, 2 ways to execute, because you really don't have the headspace to do more than that. So, and then every specific application is an expression of that base of using wrestling. So the split seatbelt, where I drop an underhook around his waist and go around his hip and over his bicep. Okay. Sometimes we'll hear that called a mouse trap in some MMA gyms. Sometimes Khabib has used that to a lot of good effect. That lace, lacing of the arm around the back, over the bicep, over the wrist, whatever. He's used that quite effectively in a lot of ground and pound in the UFC. And I've heard people refer to that now even as a Dagestani handcuff. That position exists within De La Berry. So there are line drawings of that position where De La Berry was using that to go around the waist and over the arm of a swordsman that's trying to get his arm out, right, and trying to draw a blade. So he's using that to stifle the draw of an adversary's weapon, which works well. When we use that for a guy who gets a knife out, who gives us a pull reaction and blades his body a bit, which now gives me the split seatbelt. Now it gives me an effective 2-on-1 for the weapons-bearing limb, which is optimal to stabilize. And now I can resolve that by bouncing him off the ground in a nasty throw, that's a finisher. And or it allows me to free my hand up, pound on him, or it allows me to free my hand up and use my weapon. In the case of, so we use that position, and the reason it's in the curriculum is because it has so much utility. It creates in-fight weapons access timing for you to produce a weapon. It creates dirty boxing opportunities. It creates an effective 2-on-1 to deal with a blade that's already out, which you need to get 2 hands on. And it stuffs an adversary's jaw if you catch him doing that before the weapon comes out. So because it has so much utility, and that's what I mean when I say congruency, I can do so much with that position. That's why it's in the curriculum, and it's common, and historically it fucking works. And we see it even used in MMA these days. That's the reason that's there. All right. So that's what I mean by, looking, and that's what I mean by congruent, right? And that's what I mean by not looking for another tool in the toolbox, or not adding another tool in the toolbox. If I come up with a problem that I'm trying to figure out the solution to, the first place I'm going to look, if my curriculum is well developed, is inside of the curriculum. I'll give you an example. Naval Special Warfare, the SEALs here in the U.S., they use Shivworks content. So every kid that comes through NSW is going through BUDS and gets from BUDS to STT, their week of combatives. They use quite a bit of our content. They use our shooting positions. They use our rifle grappling stuff. And the positions that they finish to when they wall walk up with an adversary wrapped up with them, when they're in armor and nods and a lid and everything else, they finish actually with split seatbelt and bundle. Well, we were at the schoolhouse with them working, doing some instructor development, and they had this question. They were trying to do a takedown off the overhook, and they were trying to figure out how to do that. If they had an overhook position, what's the best takedown? And they were adding things. They were looking outside the curriculum. And I said, well, hey, look, guys, the way we deal with a free swinging knife within the curriculum, okay, works the same as a takedown on the wall if you just drive his elbow up a little bit more and you break his posture with a whizzer, it'll tilt him, it'll have the same effect. And they're like, oh. So that was a lesson to those young instructors about congruency, right? And if you are problem solving, you get into a specific equipment issue, or you get into a specific environment. Okay, we're fighting, like here's real specific, right? Fighting with handguns inside of vehicles.
Yeah.
That's a specific environment, and that environment is so novel that it's so novel and unique that if you don't train in that environment and you get stuck, like I was, fighting over a gun in a car and losing some hearing in this ear, on a crack deal working undercover in 1997. You're not going to have a game plan, and you're not going to just figure that out in the moment. And one of the things besides the specificity of a problem, when you start looking at how to solve it, is the specificity of the environment. And vehicles in particular are so novel and so specific that if you don't train in them, what you do in open mat space is absolutely not gonna translate. And I corroborate this by saying that I have world-class BJJ black belts, people that have fought in the top 10 of the UFC, people who are, Pan Am winners, people who have done ADCC trials, people who have, 30-year, pedigrees in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. When I put them in a car, quite often they get crushed.
Yeah, everything changes.
It's so novel, they can't translate their orthodox skill set and motor skills that have been developed in training space. And we know training space is what is space designed for your implicit or explicit comfort and safety.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm a big fan. That's a lot. I'm a big fan of. I guess I've had too much coffee today. I'm a big fan of wrestling. Big fan. I think wrestling there's a lot of efficacy. I didn't wrestle when I was a kid. I came to wrestling late.
Okay.
I came to wrestling in my early 30s. So after a lot of failures, and if you look at guys like Jeff, Jeff Thompson. I mean, Jeff did a lot of probably mostly silly traditional martial arts that while they may not be silly under themselves, the way they were trained were probably.
It really depends of the instructor that you have. I say it's really down to the individual rather than the style.
Yeah. Well, and then if you're not training realistically and the martial art exists to propagate itself, then all of a sudden it starts departing more from reality into artistry.
Yeah. Talking about Geoff, I'm interviewing him on the 24th.
Yeah, Jeff's a legend. That guy's gotten more. Jeff and I spoke, I think, once or twice on the phone. I've never had the privilege of his company. It's a shame too, because I taught in, and I may come back, but I've taught, I taught in England for 11 years running. I think from 06 to 17. I haven't been back there since 17.
I only met him once last year, and it was great. Like I was privileged enough to have like a nice conversation with him, and I didn't even think I was going to be able to interview him, to be honest with you, because he's such a busy guy. But he remembered me, man. So it was great. It's great. So it's a great conversation waiting to happen. So now speaking about a bit about the soft skills, and I know that one thing, for example, in UC that we learned was the way that we're being approached, the way that people approach us, and these contact management, this management of personal space. Now, how would the dynamic of managing personal space change when a firearm is involved? Because now you basically keeping somebody away from you might not be the best option now that he's got a firearm. Maybe it's time to close in at that point, or how would you go about it?
Yeah, it's if you're actually talking about dealing with someone who has holding or is drawing a pistol,
Mm,
there's a sweet spot of distance, and it seems to be about a step outside of arm's reach where closing is viable. And outside of that, depending on the person and their ability to draw, and get a gun out if they don't flub or foul their own draw, which people can do. Um, Probably about a step, so 3 feet outside of wingspan. So I would say two, probably a single step outside of where you can touch him and he can touch you. That seems to be the sweet spot. And again, we're not taking environmental factors in. I mean, what is closing someone rapidly or making any movement rapidly? What does that look like? What does that look like in Manchester in February, maybe when there's ice on the ground?
yeah.
And somebody's wearing slick-soled dress shoes, because they're a white-collar professional.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's summertime and you're in an asphalt parking lot and some beater vehicle has dumped a patch of hydraulic fluid. So the environment is a huge part of your ability to execute strategies, tactics, and techniques. And I think environmental considerations quite often are not factored into. I'll be quite frank. I mean, sometimes you can do everything right and have the best plan. It's just your day.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't want to hear that. A lot of people don't want to hear, dude, it's just your day. It's just your day. There is no solution for this. Nobody likes, especially when they come to a guy like me or Jeff or Lee Morrison or Kelly McCann or whoever. They want answers, right? They want us to solve their problem. And I think most of those guys, myself included, would probably say, you know what, you're just kind of fucked. That's all there is to it. There's nothing that can be done about that. So sometimes your options may be, maybe because I can't move, because the environment, I can't move rapidly and close on this guy. He's drawing. I see this gun coming out. I can't even run off, right? Maybe the best thing I can do is start holding space and feigning compliance and find out. Because here's the thing: if this guy's just drawn a pistol and popped one in your head,
there's nothing you can do.
He obviously wants something.
Yeah.
You should probably figure out what that is.
Yeah. Otherwise, he would have shot you already. Yeah.
And a good way to do that is by talking. Talking allows you to try and ascertain what he wants.
Yeah.
The other thing talking does is it sets you up to possibly apply some kind of physical action, because language has an effect on applying friction.
Pattern interruption. Yeah.
Friction to motor skills.
Yeah.
Cognitively.
Yeah.
If you one of the reasons sucker punches are so insidious, besides the range, is that they typically come out of conversation. They come out of dialogue. And it's one of the reasons so I coined the term managing unknown contacts to describe the Shivworks strategy template for enhancing one's awareness and managing distance from an approaching stranger in a place that would support a crime against a person. So, what we do in a familial setting with a stranger that's new to our home, at a Christmas party is not managing unknown contact. That's a stranger, but it's not a place that would support a crime against a person, So yes, that person is strange, but the environment is not conducive to that. But nonetheless, back to managing unknown contacts, or MUC, as I called it. I coined managing unknown contacts, that phrase, 2002.
Yeah, so we've been using that.
Yeah, that's when I coined that language. And I've seen the language, contact management, whatever. I've seen that, I saw that pop up, in the British Combatives community somewhere around 2004.
Yeah. I realize, there is, because I'm not native English speaker myself. I was born in France. I grew up in Eastern Europe. So a lot of my vocabulary comes from the various people that I've listened to. So yourself, or Lee Morrison, or John Thompson. And then I realized that everyone is kind of saying the same thing, just using different words. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, managing unknown contact management, dealing with approaching strangers, right?
Yeah.
Whatever. Okay. What we really, I don't think we did a very good job on, and historically it wasn't trained physically, was that time and space, right? And you asked earlier about soft skills.
Yeah.
Awareness, mindset. Here's a very popular one: de-escalation.
Yeah.
Right. What does that mean?
Diffusion.
Here's what I think the combatives community and the martial arts community has done with soft skills. They have paid them lip service. They haven't defined them. They know they're important, and they have not created physical training modalities to actually make a soft skill actionable. So Jeff did this. He was one of the first people that did this with a fence. Now, a fence, is that a soft skill or a hard skill? Is it something in between? Jeff's, and what he learned on doors, as far as, hey, I want to have my hands up, between me and him. That serves a lot of different functions. It gets my hands closer to my head. If I have to cover my head, suddenly it helps connote, some verbal, some language that I get, like when I say, hey, stop. I'm dealing with like a non-native English speaker. They may not understand stop, but they probably understand this, right? They understand the body language. They understand what I'm doing with the fence. It's a great feeler if you extend it to ascertain and verify range. It's a great way to get some feedback on what's going on with a person's body. And, it's a great way to hit someone preemptively. There are all kinds of things. So Jeff took that idea, which is, I would say offense is a soft skill. And he developed physical training modalities so it actually came out, right? He's one of the first guys to do that. So the same thing, and there are a handful of people that have done that, right? Jeff did that. Tony Blauer,
Mm. Yeah.
defined, his language for a lot of what he does with offense, he calls nonviolent posture. You
Mhm.
know, I use Jeff's language, and I credit Jeff. Like every time I teach a Shivworks course and I introduce the fence and managing
Mhm.
of contacts, so the fence is part of managing of contact.
Yeah.
I always reference Jeff and say, hey, we're gonna, what should we be doing with our hands when we have an approaching stranger? We should probably have them up,
Mm.
you know, maybe acting as somewhat of a barrier between me and this approaching stranger, and we'll use the word offense to
Mm.
describe that idea. That word, which originally coined by a very famous UK doorman, combatives instructor, BAFTA winner, and author by the name of Jeff Thompson. If you don't know him, go look up his body of work. It predates mine by quite a few years.
Mm.
And you should look and see Jeff's take. Blah. So I cite Jeff, cite his work, just like you would a research paper, because that's not my work. It's
Yeah.
Jeff's. And every
Yeah.
time I use it, I cite him, just like I would if I was a college professor and I'd grab from another source. Always cite Jeff. And the other reason I do that, I don't think there are enough young people, people in their 20s and 30s that are getting into self-defense that really know who he is and what he actually did. That was light years
Mm.
of what anyone else was doing. So he was one of the first guys that did that, and very few people have actually come up with verbal or excuse me, physical drills to make soft skills actionable.
Yeah.
Here, when we talk about de-escalation, you should do that. You'll hear guys say this. Hey guys, well, probably the first thing you should do is try and de-escalate.
Yeah.
What does that mean? How do I try and de-escalate? Does that mean that I posture up and try and intimidate this person to make them cower, thus de-escalating the situation and not letting it get physical, like a puffer fish? I use humor to do that. Can I be disarming? Can I can I try and elicit some empathy?
Yeah. Fish for empathy. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I try and do that? When a guy looks at me and says, hey man, were you looking at my wife right over there? I just saw you looking at my wife. You were staring at her ass. Nah, man, I was kind of glazed and just not really looking at your wife at all, other than she reminds me of my sister. She's built just like her. Hair looks similar, and she passed away from leukemia like 10 years ago. And it just kind of brought me back to that moment.
Mm. Yeah.
Right. I mean, so I'm trying to get some empathy there. How often, so de-escalation is definitely a soft skill. It requires verbal agility. It requires a working knowledge of empathy. It requires connection. It requires understanding. I have an expression that you hear people hear me say all the time: life's a dope deal. Because here's the thing: you're buying drugs. You're not buying drugs. You're essentially selling yourself. That's what everything in life is. You'll hear me say life's dope deal, right? Because it'll work if you can sell it. Years ago, I was teaching at a conference. I was at a gas pump Sunday morning, and I wasn't dressed in anything tactical. I had jeans and t-shirt, and I had a kind of a local thuggy type roll the corner, suck his teeth at me, and ask me, "Hey man, you got any money?" And just as I am now, I looked at him, caught his eye. I stepped forward. I said, "Man, I don't have any money, but do you have any warrants?" So he immediately was like, "Oh no, I'm good, officer," and he moved on. Now I never showed him a badge, never showed him a gun. I didn't have anything on my body. My clothing wasn't indicative of any kind of color of authority. Okay? But I can sell that.
Yeah.
because I stepped up as a plainclothes narcotics agent on plenty of guys like him on the street with every bit of authenticity that my office gave me, right, in scuffing up those guys every day on the streets and street corners to do that,
Mm.
right? So, and I can do shit like that because I can sell it, right?
Mm.
Authenticity and being who you are is a big part of selling things. So if you
Yeah.
know yourself and you know who you are, there are things that you can sell. You know,
Mhm.
um, what are the physical training modalities to teach people all of those soft skills? Largely, they don't exist. Largely, if you want to learn, because here's the thing, you can be a very skilled guy, you can be fit, strong, fast, be the best BJJ guy in the world, be proficient with firearms and weapons, but because you're mildly autistic and you
Mhm.
work in a cube farm doing tech,
Mm.
you have problems with social literacy and you have problems with verbosity, and it's fairly easy for you to be misunderstood, and it's fairly easy for you to misread someone's facial expressions. It's fairly easy for you to make a social faux pas that could very well lead to a physical altercation. So probably for that person, do they need to be spending more time hitting the bag, or do they need to think about joining something like Toastmasters, where
Mm.
you are forced to speak to strangers off the cuff, you know, um, frequently and develop that skill.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. I don't think the self defense community has largely done a good job of teaching, as we call them, soft skills. And if you
Mm.
think about it, here's the fatal flaw: the vast majority of people, 99.9% of them, okay, who teach self defense skills with or without weapons are people who are predisposed to the physical outcome.
Yeah.
I mean, if you really want to talk about de escalation, we should probably bring in that nerdy kid who was not an athlete, who couldn't fight,
Mm.
who had to talk his way out of being swirled by the athletes in the toilet when he was in high school.
Yeah.
You know, we could probably learn quite a bit from that kid. So
Sure.
I think, unfortunately, and there's some people out there that are trying to move in this direction, but I think, unfortunately, when it comes to
Yeah.
actually teaching soft skills, most guys don't know what those are.
Yeah.
They don't know how to translate them into actual training that is gonna actually affect people. I don't think they.
Yeah. There is Richard Dimitri is really good in that aspect, like violence prevention, the soft skills, how to outbirth violence before even violence occurs. I
Mm.
think that's amazing. That's something I'm gonna lean on. I've started to lean on now already quite some time ago. And I'm gonna continue because it's very, very important aspect of self protection. Like,
Yeah, and I tell you, you have to go to weird places to learn. I tell you where you can learn a lot about verbal agility, um, and how people manage verbal aggression. If you watch good stand-up comics who are still working bars and clubs, and how they deal with hecklers or how they deal with an unresponsive audience, they have a really good take on that, because they're
mm,
doing it every night. They're strictly using words and language to create effect
mhm,
to strangers. So when you get into the actual nuts and bolts art and science of comedy, there's quite a bit to it. If you listen to like, if you listen to the JRE, when the Joe Rogan Experience, when he has other comics on there, I always listen, especially if they start talking about their time in clubs, like a comedy store, or if they go on the road and they're working freaking, Indian casinos and bar rooms and shit like that. How do they deal with all those people, entertain them, deal with hecklers that are trying to knock them off their act? I think there's quite a bit in comedy to learn about verbal agility and managing people's emotional space.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like the term verbal agility. That's thinking around that.
That's my language that I use to describe your ability to navigate problems verbally, your verbal agility. There are two components: verbal agility and social literacy. How well you read, the output of others and the space that you're both co-located in. Your social literacy in the office, understanding, if you're working in an office space, your social literacy in, a supervisor who is gonna take credit for your work, a team of people who, some guys are go-getters, some guys are not going to contribute anything but take credit. What's your social literacy in navigating the output of all those people and the environment that you're all co-located in achieving a desirable goal?
Yeah.
So those two things, to me, verbal agility and social literacy, those are big.
Yeah.
Those are big. I'm a big fan of, especially with people that carry firearms in public space, of them being verbally agile and socially literate.
Okay. It's like I've heard the term that was quite similar by Tim Tackett, the verbal judo. He's got a video where he actually speaks about that, what we just talked about.
Yeah, and verbal judo is actually specific language and a course of instruction. I can't remember his last name, but his first name is George. He was an East Coast cop that came out with that specific phrase and the course of instruction that followed with it for U.S. law enforcement. That's actually, I believe, verbal judo is actually trademarked by. I wish I could remember his name. I could probably Google that. Anyway, that's been around for a long time. It was specific to U.S. law enforcement, and it's gone from being synonymous with the person and their course of instruction, body of work, to common vernacular and lexicon now. That again, people use that phrase, but they don't know the origins of it and where it came from, who came up with it, what does it actually mean. But that actually, verbal judo probably is, at least for professional populations, that's probably one of the oldest courses of formal instruction out there. I'm wanting to say, geez, verbal judo has been around, I think, since the late 70s as a formal course of instruction for U.S. law enforcement.
Yeah. That's around that time. So when Bruce Lee, we've all seen that scene in Enter the Dragon when Bruce Lee's on the boat and that guy is trying to start on him, and he's saying, what's your style? And he says, you can call it the art of fighting without fighting.
Right.
Do you remember that?
It's one of my favorite. Yeah, it's one of my favorite lines.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite. The art of fighting without fighting. Yeah, it's great. It's great. Yeah.
So, like, kind of jumping back a bit into the technical aspect of things, how do you deal with the difficulties of using your firearm in extreme close quarter and at the same time having to think about weapon retention?
Yeah, so it's really not an extreme close quarter shooting problem so much as it's a wrestling problem with a gun.
Okay.
So the more appropriate and the better my wrestling is. Now it's just a matter of using that to facilitate the draw and making sure that the gun is in the right place. So I deconflict the support hand, which is always ahead of the muzzle, strike the adversary and not strike other people. And that's the gun being in the proper shooting position of a downward angled thumb pectoral index. That's the position I teach.
Yeah.
And have developed for me and mine, how we teach it for that issue. And we've had at this point, we've had people shoot other people with our curriculum inside clinches and ground fights. So far, we haven't missed anybody. We haven't had anybody shoot themselves or send a round off into the general public or hit somebody else. So we've had good success with that. But it's a wrestling problem with the gun. Following the IFWA principles, in-fight weapons access principles, timing, using the wrestling to facilitate that, and the gun being in the right place. That's how we manage all that. It's the idea behind entangled handgun presentations is truly interdisciplinary.
Okay. Now, from a martial arts and combative training perspective, what do you have to say about the difference between attribute development and actual fight development? And how do you actually go from one to the other? Or is there like a progression? Is there a methodology behind it?
Yeah. So, some things are you can shortcut, and when we say an attribute, there's what people innately have that they've worked on, who they are, that they brought to the table. Balance. That's an attribute.
Yeah.
Posture. That's an attribute. Speed. That's an attribute, right? The question is, can we develop attributes in compressed time formats? There's some things that, you're just not going to be able to develop, like actual plyometric ability. We can enhance that, but you don't, at least from my understanding, some kinesiologists may correct me, we don't develop more short twitch or long twitch muscle fibers. That you're kind of born, and your body type is what it is. You don't get more of those, right? So explosiveness, right? That attribute. I think we can develop what we have, but we can't get more. Where you can get more strength, because strength is a function of both musculature and neurology. And efficiency and movement. In strength training, one of the things you hear from all really good strength coaches, you train the movement. Movement becomes more efficient, and you recruit more of what you have. You'll develop that. Like the guy that taught me the big three core lifts and powerlifting, Richard Hawthorne. He's a little bitty guy. Richard right now is probably 140 pounds. But when he was competing in powerlifting, he competed at 128, and he deadlifted like 630. They call him the Ant, because he deadlifted 5 times his body weight. And when you look at a guy, 128 pounds, freaking pulling from the floor, 630, it's like, Jesus, how does he do that? He's so tiny. Well, it's a fun, because number one, strength is a function of neurology and it's a function of musculature. Actually, more neurology than anything else. Richard's efficiency and his ability to recruit through proper movement and proper leverages and body mechanics and things like that. The way, which is fairly specific, the way Richard teaches, he's the one that taught me how to deadlift, and there are different schools of deadlifting, but nonetheless, his way worked for me, you know, and works for me. So strength is an attribute, right? Can we develop strength in 2 days? No.
No, that's a lifelong thing.
Can we
Yeah.
develop speed in 2 days? Probably not. Now, if we look at other things, posture while standing, I would consider that an attribute, your posture. Can I develop that so that you're more stable at the end of spending 2 days with me and less likely to get knocked over? Yes. Yes. When we create the operating system, when we introduce the basic strategy for using wrestling, the first thing we teach is posture, what posture is, how to bolster your posture properly so you can sustain and exert forward drive. And then we have specific drill that teaches you how to maintain the proper alignment from your pelvis through your lower spine, your mid back, your C-spine, your neck, and then finally the crown of your head. How to maintain that. We call that the mountain goat drill. So we do that. We don't let people use their hands. So when they do the mountain goat drill, the objective behind that drill is to give people the feelings. The feeling is to inculcate the feeling of posture, proper posture. So the end state of the drill, basically what happens, we take an MMA glove, we put that between two people's heads. They're not allowed to use their hands. What they're trying to do is drive their partner back, not be driven, take space, don't yield space, and stay connected. Okay, so if you're moving backwards, you're losing. So what becomes apparent is if your posture is not correct, you're going to lose the drill. So, and what the drill teaches you are three things really about your pelvic alignment, your pelvis. So when you have two people together, let's say these are both of them, and one person begins to turn and blade their hips away. With your hips bladed away, the pelvis bladed away from a square pelvis, there's no way this person can sustain or exert any kind of forward drive, so you're going to lose the drill. So what that means is our hips always have to be square, not bladed, to sustain or exert forward drive. If in the drill, these are two people, my fists, okay, we have one person who bows their pelvis and they get back on their heels. Back on their heels with their butt tucked up underneath them, there's no way they can sustain or exert any kind of forward drive. And they're going to lose the drill and get driven backwards. So what that means is your hips, your pelvic girdle always has to be rolled back, which tends to put your weight forward. Finally, if the adversary gets lower and lowers their center of gravity, this person tends to be less stable. This person tends to be more so, you know, and they're going to get driven backwards and lose the drill. So the mountain goat drill teaches you three things about your hip alignment, okay? It teaches you about the swivel of your hips, the tilt of your hips, and the height of your hips. And what we have to have is our pelvis square, tilted slightly back, and lower than the adversaries. That factor, your pelvis being the base of what sets up the line of posture that goes to the crown of your head. So we have that drill and it works remarkably well. And what we can teach is the attribute of posture now in compressed time formats. And probably the biggest compliment that I've gotten is a Division I college wrestler who's also a third-degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under Renzo Gracie, telling me that, in 4 hours, you'd have never had me believe that you can take a not athletic person who's never wrestled before in their life and work with them for 4 hours, and now they're giving me trouble. Not beating him, okay, but they're giving him trouble, right? Because their posture's better. So that's taken decades and a lot of work to figure out how to teach that one attribute that is required for good clinch work. Posture and position of the head, position of the torso relative to the other. Those two, pressure, posture, and position, those comprise what we think of in what I call an operating system. So if you think about that phrase, I borrow that from tech, right? And if you think about what an operating system does, it runs all of your applications.
Yeah.
And if your operating system fails, you can't get on the internet. You can't do a Word document. You can't do a PowerPoint. You can't do a spreadsheet. So what are applications for us fighting inside of Wingspan and Tangle? Getting a gun out. That would be an application. Denying someone a weapon that they're trying to recover from their body, that fouling a draw, that would be an application. Disengaging appropriately, that would be an application. Retaining our pistol if it's felt and grabbed in a clinch or ground fight, that would be an application. So without an operating system, none of those applications will run. So our operating system, drawn from Greco-Roman wrestling, teaches the attributes of pressure, posture, and position. And we say that pressure, posture, and position form a tripod of stability that allows you to run your application successfully.
Okay.
So do I think attributes can be taught and learned in combatives, in what I think of as combatives, compressed finite time formats? I think to do that requires a ton of acumen.
Yeah. Okay. So the next question. So, as instructor, we understand the importance of being able to perform under stress via some sort of contact, full contact simulations or scenario training. I know you teach these. I was going to tell you, do you teach your student how to pressure test? We all know you do, but how do you guys do that?
We do that physically. We do that with other ways. So, pressure comes from a lot of different places. But besides actual contact with someone, freedom of motion, pretty much being allowed to do anything that protective equipment will facilitate. There are other ways to induce pressure. Just having to perform in front of others.
Yeah, peer pressure. Yeah.
That performance anxiety. That raises pressure quite a bit. Being under uncertainty, like not exactly sure when it's going to happen. Whether that's facilitated through like a classic hooded drill where there's a hood that goes over someone's head. It used to be done in Dieter's CQD program. He's one of the big guys that did that early on. Where you're basically blindfolded and whoop, this comes off your head, and you're confronted with whatever. Yeah, that induces pressure. You know,
Mm, yeah,
weather can induce pressure, terrain, unfamiliar environments,
yeah,
right? What does BJJ look like when you're in a closed switchback, descending or ascending stairwell?
yeah.
You know, so environments can induce pressure. There are a lot of different ways to do that, and I use and understand the effects of all of
Okay. So do you also add maybe added fatigue and disorientation beforehand before you
them. Not
actually
really,
no?
not really. I don't think that's necessary. And here's the thing: I can have a world class athlete,
Mm,
and I really don't think that doing push ups and calisthenics before somebody performs. That to me is rudimentary. I mean, here's the thing: what you have to do is it's not just the heart rate, right? It's what's happening to them emotionally.
mm,
I mean, if I jack your heart rate up and you're just one of those guys that emotionally that doesn't bother you, you can function with a high heart rate. There are plenty of world class athletes that the heart rate that's not an issue. That's not an issue. Uncertainty, that's
mm,
a big one.
yeah,
Uncertainty is, to me, that's the most important element.
yeah, not knowing. Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter what you're not knowing, who you're going to go with next. When I have a class of 20 or 24 or 30 people, and everybody's waiting their turn, right? And
Mm,
they're wondering who I'm going to pair them with when
yeah.
it's their turn to perform is the person that they beat up that day. And they're like, man, I sure hope I get paired up with him because I could steamroll him. Or is the guy that's been avoiding all day. And one of the things I do is I watch from the time I watch the group dynamic from the time we get started to start making what are appropriate pairings for our validation model, which is what we call an evolution. Um, and I facilitate that.
Yeah.
So that's a big one right there. The build up. You
Yeah.
know, especially like you're looking around, it's like, okay, pair those two guys. That only leaves these guys. I hope it's this guy. I hope it's that guy. Oh shit. You know,
Mm,
he just paired the guy that I wanted to go with somebody else, and that's going to be one of these two guys. And I really hope it's of the two left. It's not that. All that builds. All that builds, right? The we are driving people's anxiety.
yeah.
That that does far more to me than push-ups and burpees.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. How would you rate the importance of understanding the effect of adrenal stress and the cognitive shift and all the physiological changes that come with it?
Yeah, I think it's vital that we understand that. And again, you know, um, facilitating that experience and training is something I pretty much do for everybody. And again,
Mhm.
you know, um, some of that is physical, and a lot of that is the emotional reaction. Like
Yeah.
I'll have a BJJ guy who's easily handling someone that doesn't have BJJ, but because they don't grapple with a handgun, the person does something that's not in any BJJ language,
Mm.
right? He just reaches up and snatches the gun. All of a sudden now he has to use his BJJ to get his gun back, which he's never done before, and it's a variable that he's never dealt with before. So for him, it's not just what's happening physically, it's what's happening physically that he's never experienced before.
Yeah.
You know, um, you know, here's what reduces adrenal. responses is driving everything with novelty. So one of the things we have to do is remove novelty as much as possible. When things happen that you don't have a pattern for or an experience with, that more than anything else is what creates adrenaline. Is that uncertainty? Physical exercise in and of itself and physicality in isolation, I don't believe without other elements really adrenalizes people, where they actually will truly be in an adrenalized state. Where we see people do things that they would never ever do. We see bad patterning come out. Here's one. You would think if somebody is on your back punching you in the back of the head, that what's immediately common sense and you would naturally do, is you would try and escape that position. You're trying to hit it back. Okay. Well, if you are a firearms enthusiast and practitioner and your gun in an entangled fight has gone click and you have literally thousands of repetitions tapping and racking the slide to get the gun working again, we will see that patterning come out under stress, right? So we will see them, we call it a metronome. So if you're familiar with the metronome, that little thing in music goes tick, 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 back and forth like that, doesn't go anywhere else, doesn't do anything else. We'll see them mindlessly metronome, tap, rack, tap, rack, tap, rack, tap, rack, tap, rack, tap, rack, tap, rack. Just, and get caught in a loop, not solving the position, continuing to get punched in the head, not getting the gun fixed, right? Because they've been improperly patterned and they are truly adrenalized. That, and I do this every weekend. I do this 40 weeks a year. So, I mean, I've been successful in adrenalizing, commandos, soccer moms, and I know what that looks like. And I don't believe that calisthenics is the way to do that. There have to be other factors. But yeah, I mean, that's how I know people. I mean, when they do things that mindlessly don't solve the problem, they latch onto it like it's a rabbit's foot or a totem or a mantra, something they just say, that's not getting anything fixed. I see that all the time. So very aware of the importance of that. And it's something that's fairly intrinsic to my coursework.
So we speak very often about mental and emotional, plus physical preparation. How would you rate the importance of cultivating the right mindset, and how would you go about this?
So I think, there are two words in this business racket, whatever you want to call it, that people think are verbs: awareness and mindset. I will aware my way out of this dark parking garage. I will mindset this guy who's 100 pounds heavier than me off me when he's mounted on me, punching him in the face. Those aren't verbs. You're not going to aware your way out of anything. You're not going to mindset your way out of anything, or you're going to mindset anyone off of you. So it's a broad term. Does mindset mean willingness? Does mindset mean resilience? Does mindset mean tenacity? Does mindset mean decisiveness? it's become a meaningless soundbite, I think, for the most part. Um, you know, I think the way to develop mindset is with oppositional, ambiguous, pressure-based training and validation models that incorporate freedom of action and malevolent intention
Okay.
and opposing will. That's where you learn your mindset. Is you don't I don't think anyone learns and actually retains and exudes mindset in a PowerPoint or a lecture. Some people do. Some people will be like, well, that one thing that guy said really made a difference. But I mean, you know, learning resilience, you know, like I think you learn that by experiencing adversity,
Mm,
you know,
yeah.
the willingness to just and like one of the things I will do when I see someone foundering and you can see their body language, they sound helpless, they're on the bottom, they've got a helmet on, they're struggling to retain their guns, somebody's bigger and stronger than them. And I know the gun's gonna get torn out of their hands, and I know they're probably gonna get shot with their own pistol. But I will try and give them something attainable before I actually call the evolution. So I don't want it necessarily ended with them just on the bottom getting shot repeatedly by their own handgun. Then they get shot a few times, okay, but I'll tell them grab the gun. Don't let him shoot you anymore. Grab the gun. Grab. They can just get a hand up, even though they've been shot 6 times, and avert the muzzle and actually start to train. Even if they're in a bad position, a lot of times I'll call it there versus calling it earlier. So I've given them something that I recognize more than likely is attainable. And they're having a hard time taking the coaching. Grab his gun. Just grab his gun. Get your gun back. Get your gun back. Get your gun. Move. So they learn and they're coached in the moment. With simple instruction to persevere, which starts building resilience and gives them an endpoint for the exercise of feeling, okay, well, I didn't quit. I didn't do well, but I didn't
Yeah.
quit. I kept going. I did just like you told me. I got my hand up there and I grabbed the gun. I didn't know what I was going to do next. Boom. That's where you end it. That's where you call it. So you have to have an eye to be able to do that. But yeah, I mean, I think it's those moments that you start learning, inculcating mindset.
Yeah.
Or a factor of mindset, right?
Yeah.
We learned resilience, right? Or maybe you had a bad experience in your revolution, you lost, and I don't look at any of them as wins and loses, as wins or losses, but I know the patrons do, and a lot of times, they will leave the course, and I'm like, you know what, that guy beat me up, took my gun, shot me with it, and I don't want that to ever happen again.
Yeah.
Okay. So they've decided, you know what I'm not going to do is train Brazilian Jiu Jitsu because I'm too old or, I'm too fat and I can work on getting leaner. I can't do anything about aging, but I'm just going to get way more decisive when I do manage space before it gets kinetic. And I
Mm.
may very well get my pistol out earlier because, I've got, um, 3 fused discs in my neck, 2 in my back. I've had a hip replacement, and I just can't take getting slammed on the ground if that were to happen. So then it's the experience facilitated by the coursework that gives them the attribute of decisiveness. They are way more decisive, right?
Mm.
And decisiveness is definitely a factor in the broad umbrella of mindset.
Yeah.
So that's, in my opinion, how we learn mindset.
Okay. Good. You made me want to better my English. No, it's true. I
No,
mean,
your English. So, Julian, your English is excellent, and you're not speaking any worse than most than the 99% of the native English speakers that teach combatives. Your English is not bad. The
well,
population, the population as a whole, I just think we need to be more precise
yeah.
in our language and give a lot more thought to how and what we're saying and be better educators overall.
No, that is definitely one of the biggest things that I will get from that interview. It kind of makes me want to be more precise with the way that I explain things because you broke things down in a way that I was like, oh yeah, that's like that's mindset. Obviously, for me, it was when I think about mindset, something I've been thinking a lot about in my life because, like yourself, when I was younger, I was getting bullied a lot. I was diagnosed with ADHD. I'm on the mild spectrum of autism as well. So I was the guy that was always being bullied at school. And I I knew how to fight from a very young age, but for a long time I didn't want to fight back. I was scared. I was scared to fight back. I was scared of the consequences, scared of getting hurt, scared of hurting the other person. And one day, what happened is something happened. There has been a shift. I got badly hurt when I was younger. They broke my collarbone, and my father had to come home from another city to tell me, look, I know I've told you that it's not a good idea to fight back, but sometimes you have to. And then there's been a shift, but unfortunately, I went from one extreme to the other, and I started fighting all the time after, and I had to find the right middle. But mindset,
Very, very familiar with that dynamic
yeah,
in my life too.
yeah,
Being bullied, becoming the bully.
mm,
I, I have I have done both.
yeah,
As a teen and a young man, definitely.
yeah. It's like you find the balance eventually at some point. You gotta go. It's like using the analogy of the ship at the sea, and the sea goes. The storm makes you go left and right, and you gotta kind of find a way to stabilize your ship in the storm. So
Yeah.
yeah. So did you ever have to use your skill set in a real life situation in real life?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Several times.
Okay. Okay. How did these experiences made you evolve as a human being? Did it?
The probably most two. There were two pivotal experiences that I had when I was working undercover. That was losing some hearing in this ear, fighting over a gun in a car.
Yeah.
Discharged about an inch away from my face. Didn't have a solution for that, and then I was assaulted by two guys on a powder cocaine deal in a hotel room. Had my skull fractured by a socket wrench, and was almost beat to death and shot in the face by two guys. And fortunately, the cover team was doing their job that day and basically breached the door and got in there to save my life. So those were and there were a host of other failures that occurred that kind of set up an empty room in my head that I could sit by myself and think,
Mm,
about what happened. So yeah, I mean, a lot of that stuff that happened in that 2 year time period of doing undercover work, that was the genesis for a lot for all things really Shivworks.
okay. Have you ever suffered of post-traumatic stress disorder or anything because of what?
Yeah, I mean nothing that wasn't manageable, but for I give here's a small or not so small thing. For years after I came out of that, like 5 or 6 years, um, I could not sit in the passenger seat of a stationary running vehicle with someone else in control. Like
Mm,
my first wife, she had a bad habit of, if she was driving, I'd get in the passenger seat, she'd belt up, she'd turn the car on, and we'd be in a parking spot, and she would pedal about and do various things, and makeup and mirror and purse, and I would just feel this just overwhelming anxiety, and I would just have to get out of the car until she got her shit done, and then I'd get back in, and that was just from year, that 2 year time period every day on buying drugs and cars.
right. Yeah,
You
it
know,
kind of gets imprinted on in your psyche. Yeah.
being assaulted in cars. You know, so I mean, I had several car fights. Only one with a gun, but well,
Okay.
a gun that got out and discharged. But I had several fights in cars.
Okay.
So yeah, a
Do
little
you,
bit, not too much to answer your question. Yeah, a little bit of PTSD. That's the one that actually I'm sure there's more. But
mm,
that's like the first one I thought about that you know
yeah.
that came up.
Okay. Do you implement some sort of internal work, like some sort of tai chi or qigong or meditation or breath work, anything that really allows you to go back to a calm and collected state when you feel yourself going,
Not really anything internal. I'm not very good at that. I usually need something external. So I need
Okay.
music. I need playing with
Yeah.
my dogs. I need other people to help.
Yeah.
Now,
Nature.
I'm probably at best flow state when I'm teaching
Yeah.
because other people have external factors. Um, I've gone into some work with psychedelics because I need that
Yep.
apparently, and it's been really interesting. I mean, and I know you can get to a lot of these entheogenic states by internal work, breath work,
Yeah.
right? Can give you a lot of the effects that the plants can give you, but I can't get there
Yeah.
without something smashing me
You
there.
induce.
It's usually a plant.
I got a very similar problem when it comes to inducing these altered state of consciousness where you can do the work. And yeah, like yourself, really one thing that really helped me evolve in life was shamanic work, working
Yeah,
with a shaman and drinking ayahuasca, for example, was a big thing. That kind of forces you to it gets your demons right out and put it right in front of your eyes, and you just got to deal with it. There's no escaping it. It's one of the most difficult experience that you can have in your life, but it's very worth it
yeah.
because it's very very transformative. Like, so have you had that experience? Have you gone
I
to?
haven't done ayahuasca. My partner has. She's done wachuma.
Okay.
So that's the male ceremony versus I have the female ceremony. She has
Hmm.
extensive experience with entheogenic medicine,
Hmm.
and I have, you know, I haven't quite gone to a Terrence McKenna hero's dose yet, but I've been really close, and that's hard work.
It is
That's difficult work. It really is. So
100%.
I need it, and I think it's the work that you're like, fuck, man, it's really hard, and
Yeah.
it's scary. Whether that's getting a stranger on top of you
Mm,
and trying to retain your handgun, or whether it's sitting in blackness with no stimulation after 6 grams of mushrooms, right?
yeah.
Whether that's what frightens you. whatever it is that frightens you, that's probably the work that
Mm.
you need to do. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the plants.
Have you worked with peyote or San Pedro cacti?
I have not. My partner has. My
I've done
partner
some
has.
amazing work. Some of the
Yeah,
most amazing work I ever done was with San Pedro cactus. Amazing stuff.
yeah, and I've got some guys, some pretty badly damaged veterans that have gone and done like toad and DMT and stuff like that. And
Oh,
they
yeah.
yeah, some of them have done ketamine. You know,
Okay.
I'm very interested in all that stuff, and for me, it's things that you do with intention, right? It's not recreational. It's
No.
I think if we look at if we look at how ancient indigenous people
Hmm.
use these substances, I think we can learn a lot from
Personal development. Yeah.
yeah,
That's how it's meant to be used. And unfortunately, you got a lot of people that have been introduced to the mushrooms in a recreational way, and they never have the chance to actually use it the proper way, the way
yeah,
that it's meant to be done.
yeah,
What I like to do is I like to have a board. I create a board, so I got a whiteboard, and on the whiteboard I write my intentions. I try not to have too many, just a few intentions of the things that I want to work on. And then it's all about opening the circle. Obviously, I'm a very spiritual guy. I do believe that there are forces at work around us that we can't see. And so it's all about kind of, bringing the right energy in and make sure that the wrong energy is out of our circle while we do that healing work. And
right.
it's very, very transformative
I
practice.
agree. I agree.
What about visualization? Do you use visualization for your training or for personal development purposes to improve yourself?
I have, I don't do it regularly, but when I want to achieve something, I actually do use it, and I'm very repetitive with it when
Yeah,
I'm trying to get from point A to point B. Um, so I use it situationally. It's not regular practice towards my betterment. I'll use it when I have to accomplish a goal, and I'm
okay.
pretty good at it. And I can actually it actually helps me. It actually helps me. Just
Yeah.
being repetitive in thought, eliminating negative thoughts, and like just making yourself believe that this is possible and this is going to happen.
So do you use like positive affirmations like NLP, self hypnosis, or all that
Not
sort?
really. I just see this happening. I see
Yeah.
myself doing something. It's more imagery than
Okay.
words.
Yeah.
I tend to be more image driven than word, at least
Yeah.
unspoken. I don't see like words in my head or hear words in
Yeah.
my head.
You're more
Um,
of a visual. You're more of a visual kinesthetic learner.
yeah, and I'm very word driven in conversation,
Yeah.
right? But I don't think of conversations that I've had,
Yeah. Hmm.
right? Those have to happen in the moment in real time. And I can reflect on that, but I'm very stream of consciousness right now when I speak. I'm practiced and I'm very by rote when I teach, because I say the same thing at the same time every single time I teach. There's
Yeah.
no wiggle room there. It's, all the coursework has a cogent, consistent beginning, middle, and end that I hit every weekend. And my wiggle room for plus or minus the class on an 11-hour day that goes from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. is 10 minutes. I'll give myself 10 minutes before or 10 minutes after to cover
Okay.
all the content.
Yeah. So we're getting towards the end. I just got like four or five questions that are smaller,
Sure.
much smaller. Did you have any experience that you could not explain in a rational manner?
Yeah, and I think that would be the feeling of probably and with plant medicine
Yeah.
that feeling of nothingness and your own insignificance, that you're a dust mote, and your existence is no more significant than a blade of grass or a squirrel or anything else. And all of a sudden you have connection with all that stuff, and you can, you can hear what the trees are saying.
Yeah.
I have no rational explanation for that, as someone who was raised as a Christian, who functions and has for most of their adult life as an agnostic, and then had these experience where for the first time I felt something outside of the physical world that actually, like, I connected with. So yes, I've had those, and again, all facilitated really by plant medicine.
Yeah. It definitely changes your perspective of
Yes.
what we are, our place in the universe, and the fact that what we experience is just a tiny little fraction of what there is.
Yeah, and I always wanted to feel that stuff, but I never could get there, like in church
Mm.
through prayer.
Yeah.
I would see like those old ladies, in church, and you just see their face, and you just see, man, they feel it. They
Yeah.
really feel it. Why can't I? I read, I sing, I read the words, and I don't obviously don't feel it the way they do, you
Yeah.
know. So yeah, first time I really felt like, oh wow, there's big something else.
Mm.
Probably was plant medicine.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to the younger generations?
On what?
Anything you want, Craig. Life, training, whatever it is.
Focus on being, focus on doing something, not being somebody.
Okay.
I think more people want to be somebody than they want to do something. Focus on your craft, focus on your passion, focus on something outside of yourself. Focus, whether that's a skill, whether that's a product, a trade. Get good at something, like really good something.
Yeah.
Um, you know, um, let it let it consume you. Feel what that's like, but focus on doing something versus being somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. It's people focus
That's what I
on.
would say.
Okay. And lastly, if you had the power to change the world at will, and that means at will doing anything that you want with the world, what would that be? What would you do?
I think I'd make everybody speak the same language.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. And I think that we used to. I think that before all them languages have been taught to us, that we used to speak the universal language of energy, frequency, and vibrations. And there was no lying. You can't lie. If
Yeah,
there is only one language, it is impossible to lie.
yeah,
We because we would see it straight away.
yeah,
Yeah, that's a good one.
yeah.
Craig, thank you very much for all this. That was a lot of information. I'm definitely going to be watching that again, taking
Okay,
notes. Great stuff. And
good.
um, is there anything that you want to plug in? Your website, your social media, any courses that you're selling, anything that you want to plug in onto this podcast?
Um, so if, I'm on Facebook, Instagram is Southnark, my old internet forum handle that still persists. Shivworks.com is the website, and the training schedule is posted there, information is posted there. So I'm accessible. I'm accessible through either Shivworks or Southnark on social media.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, Craig, I'll let you go. We'll just cut this, and we'll see everyone soon. I hope that everyone liked that. That was really cool. And to the next one.
Cheers.
Take care, guys.